Hello. Success. Oh, I forgot. I had to um what do you call it? Unplug all the things. Yes. Oh no. It's on. Okay, you can hear me. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Um that's awesome. Hi Ellie, hello. Hello, Shadow. I am sorry you are burnt to a crisp. Aloe vera is a lifesaver. Um at least it's my favorite thing for burns and wounds and other things. Yay! Success. Can I move this? Okay, there we go. Hi. Oh man, y'all. Good night. It's a sleepy day. Your sun melted? Ah, that is. I have only been badly sunburned once, and I had to learn the hard way because I did not realize I could get sunburned. And then I was, and it was the entirety of the front of my legs. Um, Aloe vera was the only thing, the only thing that kept me going. That was tough. I am so sorry. I know that's a very exhausting type of like feeling. Um, but no. Yeah, of course, Ellie, of course. Today is a very relaxed day. Um, I am exhausted, and I am sure it is. I know it's Wednesday, so I feel like everybody is probably pretty tired. Um, Also, it sounds like this is a good day for just. I'm happy to just be chatting too. Um, I do have a topic for today, which we will eventually get to when it's time. Um, but I am more than happy to do what I can to like help provide some kind of context or support in any way that I can. Thank you for trusting me and being willing to talk. Yee. It's Thursday. Oh, you're right. You're right. It's Thursday. Oh gosh. Well, I guess that explains me. You're right. It is Thursday. Oh. Ay. It's Thursday. Yay. Oh my gosh. But yes, I am happy to talk. Um, while you're typing, I'll talk about what the topic will eventually be today, and it's actually about libraries and the concept of third spaces in our modern age. I was this concept kind of this topic rose up um because a couple of days ago I was talking to Saint about um third spaces and our differences in experience in relation to them because Saint grew up with like a very in like a punk community and had a was like often the youngest of a group of people who are used to a very different kind of style of life where there weren't as like much online interaction in the same way. And so there was a very different culture and community about how people interacted in person and also the concept of where people would gather and learn from each other and we were kind of talking about the concept of human libraries as well, just like how a lot of communities seem to have that, people like one or two who kind of were like elders or just were like the fact holders of different spaces, and you could go to them to learn about the space you were in. Um, and it was interesting to think about that as a concept and then to realize what has happened to our third spaces now, and what's my first assumption of what a third space is. And the first thing that came to mind was the library, so I decided to look into the history of libraries and kind of see how the that developed this assumption that libraries are third spaces. And with the defunding of many library programs, how that has changed and what may have come in to help take its place, or uh, ways that the library is still maintaining its support of the community as a third space. So, ah, Ellie, my advice is yay. Okay, well, okay, so you're nervous. Um, it sounds like you're identifying these components about this person that you really are happy and excited about. Are do you feel comfortable kind of talking me through the way, like, what it is that you're worried about? Um, I know I have my own assumptions, but I because it just from the context of, like, you talk to somebody online and they seem really cool and you really want to get to know them, and you are very aware of the fact that you are quite interested in them in that way. But you also, when things are online, which actually kind of ties into the context of what we're talking about today, it can be really hard to be sure, like, oh, is this person feeling the same? Are they in the same space? So yeah, I would love to know, like, what it is that you're um trying to think through and trying to uh, self-evaluate with this. Oh, do you feel comfortable kind of talking me through what the general context was of your conversation? Um, or if you want to be like, if you want to be more vague, you don't have to give me like play-by-plays if you want to uh not like, if you don't want to. I'm happy for play-by-plays as well, but also if you don't want to, I am happy to like, if you can give me a general gist of what the conversation may have been going towards, and then where you feel like there may have been some kind of miscommunication, or any kind of um what is the source of your nervousness? Okay. But um while you're typing, I'll keep talking about libraries. Okay, so what so I grew up with the library being a very core part of my childhood. My parents were, my mom especially is a huge reader, loves books, and we often did have like just stacks of books around the house. And when I was little, I couldn't read. It was one of the first big things I like forced myself to do. And I once I was able to figure out how to do it, I just fell head first into it. I read a lot. And I read, as they say, voraciously. So anything I could get my hands on, I would read. And often I would read things that were maybe far beyond my age level, because I was excited to be able to read those things without always understanding the context of what I was reading. So, oh, have fun, Shadow. Have a good time and be safe. And don't forget to make sure you give yourself some some healing ointments because sun melted is serious. And I know I'm laughing as I say that. It's because I really love that word now. It's my new favorite. So thank you. Sun melted is actually like it's a very it's such a good way of explaining it. Yeah, no, it's so good. But please take care of yourself and make sure that you give your skin some space and time to heal. Um oh, you're getting to your home. Okay, cool. Are you on a road trip? Ooh. And okay, so I'm seeing what do you want to do, and it's what I meant to say, but I said it without the what want. What do you to do? So what do you to do? I will say, Ellie, that I would. Oh, okay, you're driving. Oh, okay, drive safe. Be safe, please. Um, and when you are in a safe space where you're not driving, let me know because I want to make sure that I want to know that you got home safe. Um, but okay, so Ellie, I know I understand the I understand that intensity of like emotion and heightened feelings of nervousness that you as a human being will not be could be completely invalidated by um, any kind of mistake you might make. But I highly I'm going to very strongly assume that considering what you've told me about how this person seems to be very aligned with your views and how you operate, and I would think even if somebody wasn't aligned with your views and how you operate as a person, that they would not take that in any negative way. Rather that it would just be, oh, okay. And then if you fix it, there's a very high likelihood that something else, maybe she's, you said, was there a gender? Okay, yes, she's. Okay. Um, I don't think that she would take that negatively or mean it in either way. Because if it's not the type of typo that could be construed as like you accidentally saying something egregious. Rather, it's just very clear where what the issue may have been, so I wouldn't worry. But I also understand that when you don't have the ability to know what's going on their end, it any response or lack of response can feel personal. But that does not mean that it is meant to be. Um, I also don't know anything obviously about this person or their schedule or their what they're doing or what like the context of their day-to-day life. So I also don't know like if they have other people around them that they may be needing to attend to. So I understand the stress and the worry, especially when you're really excited about somebody and you really are hoping that this is gonna give you more of an opportunity for connection. But I uh, I am not seeing anything that would raise any flags for me. So I think you're okay. I think you're good. It's really hard when you don't know if somebody is, especially if they're like constantly responding to you. Um, if something else comes up, or there's like their phone dies, or there's a million and 10 things that could very easily and respectfully be a reason for why somebody isn't able to respond without context for why. 200 miles. Ooh. Wow, that's a long drive. Please be safe. Please be safe. And please rest. Let yourself rest as well. That is a long drive, and on top of being sun melted. Oh, I love that. Okay, sun melted. That is going to definitely be something your body is like, okay, clock clock out for the night. Time to just relax, lay down, and heal and recalibrate. So, yes, please let me know when you are safe at home. And I'm glad you're going on adventures, though. That's really fun. I hope it was a fun adventure, or that there were fun moments within your adventure, if it wasn't intended to be a fun adventure. Um, so like for work or for whatever reason whatsoever, I hope that you had moments of like peace and happiness and positivity as well. Sometimes just being out in the sun can be a very calming experience until it gets very hot. Are you selling yourself short? Wait, you thought that she was trying to sell you something because she reached out to you? Ellie, don't sell yourself so short. Wait, is there a context here that I'm just not picking up? Because I'm like, is that like what she does? Is it she do like, it's like, oh, DM her for or she DMs people if she thinks that they have an interest in like something she produces or that she's like associated with? Really? Ah, Shadow, that sounds amazing. I love that. That sounds amazing. Yay! Oh, that's so good. Hmm. Hmm. Oh man. Whew. I I am curious, Ellie, because I get the sense that um you may not be evaluating yourself with the objectivity of someone who is not you, which is very hard to do if you are you trying to evaluate yourself. Um oh, oh, she even contacted you with her official account like, "Hey." That's the hair flip now, is to like reach out to somebody with their official account and be like, "Do you think I'm cool?" Like, I don't know, that seemed like I don't want to assume too like much about like her intentions. She might have just been like, this is the account she was on when she found you, but at the same time. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. That's so funny. Oh my gosh. I'm glad. I'm very glad, Shadow. I'm very, very glad. I mean, I feel like when there like ultimately everything that we do is an attempt to express something, and either to get us like to externalize an opportunity for us to ask ourselves questions that are difficult or hard. Um, and when we're given an opportunity to ask ourselves those questions, being honest is the most important thing. And sometimes we have to be in um, pretty intense spaces to really be able to see the wider picture. So I'm really happy for you. Hi, Brant. Hello. Hello. You are not. No, no. I actually think you're just like earnest and honest, which is a very good thing. It's a very good thing. I trying to balance on this stool is silly. Um, total boss move. I love it. I love it. I think that's fantastic. Um, that's so good. That's so good. I love. I don't know. I feel like I am hopeful, Ellie, that you will recognize that you are um, someone that is able to be seen as in the positive way that you see others. Yeah, yeah, because we often judge ourselves by the ways that we're embarrassed of ourselves, which is not how others see us. 99.999% of the time. Oh, really, Shadow? I'm really glad you went on a trip instead and gave yourself space. And maybe there are things in your life that you might be ready to move on from. And I hope that what those specific things are is more comfortably clear so that you'll have the clarity and the recognition of your own confidence and capability to move forward in a way that really allows you to continue growing and like finding the components of life that maintain your sense of peace. Because sometimes when we get away from our everyday lives by going on trips, it allows us to look back at where we are and who what we believe about ourselves and what we believe about the spaces we're in, and recognize what isn't working and what is, and then make adjustments. Because I think that's an not always a appreciated component of being able to travel, is that it does allow you a lot of perspective, and I think that's beautiful. Oh gosh, Ellie, I'm gonna tell you right now, all of us do this. All of us do this. All of us. Oh gosh. Um, mhm. You wanna know something silly? I this is old, but I remember when I was in like a baby in high school, like little. And I actually asked out this girl that I was very into, and I did not think she was going to say yes. Because she felt like she was in a different world, completely different league. And um I did the same thing of like, I got this. Oh no, I'm the worst. I got this. Oh no, I'm the worst. And I just feel like that is every relationship that you go through these intense ups and downs of like awareness of yourself and like the worst components of you that you're the most embarrassed of, and then the best components of you that you're the proudest of, and then you end up in the middle where you recognize that what you think is the worst is actually not bad. And then what you think is the best is really not good, but there are components of you that you might not be recognizing are just as important and just as beautiful. And having another person interact with you, and you have to be open and honest and vulnerable with them, can allow you to get a broader perspective of who you are, and allow you to also recognize that where you're grounded is where you get to be able to uh, engage with all of you in a way that isn't based on shame and is instead based on comfort and peace and even pride in a positive way. Um, oh my gosh, Shadow. Oh, I am so. I don't know what my face just did, but that was just like a. Um, I am so glad you're okay. I'm so glad you're okay. That is, oh God, that's terrifying. It's terrifying to see that. I am glad that people are okay. Especially on a highway collision. I, God. Um, yeah, exactly. Like Brant said, when you're really into somebody, it's very normal to be like, wee Oh, but I forgot. Yeah, so when she did say yes, I spent the rest of the afternoon, like the like evening afternoon, literally like skipping, skipping and sing-songing like I did it. I did it. It was ridiculous. Um I was so proud of myself. I was so so proud because I just also didn't think it was real because how could that possibly be real? Um And I think that ever since then, I've had this pendulum swing of coming to a more base center of being like, oh, nice. And, oh, I don't know about that. And that's kind of like the midpoint you get to, which is a good thing. It's, I think it's normal and it's important to be able to recognize the value of that process. Uh, and, also maybe um instead of responding to it as like, oh my god, oh no, use it as like an indicator, kind of like how to some degree physical pain is an indicator that the body needs to be tended to or within the brain's systems, um but it doesn't necessarily in of itself mean that you have to go into full panic mode. um I think the same can be said when it comes to the emotional ups and downs of getting to know someone new and having those like exciting, enthralling moments of discovering another human being and finding all the ways that you really appreciate them and respect them and are even attracted to them, and also realizing that they are going through that process about you and having to come to terms with the fact that people can go through that process about you when you may have beliefs about yourself that don't allow for as much positive view of yourself, or may have a stronger assumption that your negatives will be seen as like unforgivable when they're not. They're, we're no. So you just, it's that process of being seen and also seeing another person that can feel kind of exciting and enthralling, excruciating, but also excruciating. Like excruciating in a good way and excruciating in the worst way. It's a good thing to go through. It's, I think, a positive situation, and I'm excited for you. Yeah. And again, I don't know like um the general habits of this particular person, but I am sure it will probably be something you laugh about one day, if you even remember. Like, oh man, you remember that one time I texted and then I messed up a little bit because I wrote a typo, and then I panicked because you were busy doing something and I didn't realize because I didn't have context that that's what was going on, and so I spent the next like I was like, oh no, 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 what did I do? And it wasn't. It was fine. Everything was fine. And I am sure the same has probably happened the other way around. Um, yeah. Also, I would love to deconstruct the concept of leagues on a relationship level. I don't know if those feel fair because unless you're basing it on like somebody that you're really inspired by, and you would like to be maybe active in ways that they are active. I maybe just shifting it to a concept of a conversation about like, gosh, this person is so inspiring, and I'm really interested in who they are, and I really like the way that I feel challenged by the things about them that they do naturally that I would like to do more of. So it's more inspiration based than like, I can't do this because you can, you totally can. Um, Yeah, but Ellie, let me know if there's if that helped at all. Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about libraries. Um okay, so I know it hasn't been that long, but for some reason it feels like it's been a long time since I streamed on here. Um I think that's only because I've started streaming on Discord to do watch parties on Sunday nights. The last 2 nights, and we're going to start doing that consistently. We're watching right now the Memories anthology anime from 1995 that actually features one of my favorite pieces of media of all time, which is Magnetic Rose. Um, we watched that last Sunday. Yes. Me? Nah, am I? I'm trying. I hope so. Unless you're being silly, which is also very possible. Positable? Possible? What are words? I cannot. I have no words. Okay. Um Carpe diem. Just do it. Just do it. Yes. Um Libraries. Right. So could you all see the thought leave my brain? Is it? Ah. Well, I feel like Aqua, your community is perhaps very present when you stream. So it's no, Ellie! You'll overcome this vacuum cleaner. The vacuum cleaner will turn out to just be a helpful and positive, useful tool for maintaining your sense of self. You got this. You got this. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Ah, I'm excited for you. I'm very excited for you. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I can't sit in one space in one way for more than a couple of minutes. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's true. Shadow, are you home yet? Are you not driving? Cuz please do not drive and text at the same time. Please. Please, 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 please. Please. Stay safe. Stay safe. Okay. Um Magnetic Rose. Okay, there we go. So it's true. It's true, Brant. Oh, Shadow. No. But also, like I said. Oh, you pulled over. Okay. Whoo, thank gosh. Um, yeah, have you been able to stretch if you drove 200 miles? Did you drive by yourself? Please, again, take breaks, rest. If you must sleep in your car, sleep in your car. It's better to do that than to try and drive when you're really tired, because that can be so dangerous. No! LA, you got this. You got this. You got this. You can do it. We all know you can. And you are doing it. Actually, it's not even you can, you are. You actually where it's not even like you were like putting the net out into the universe. You were just existing and somebody noticed the shine of your existence and was like, "Oh, hey, hi." And there you go. what is the we have Oh, it's like the movie Pretty Woman. Okay. I was gonna try and make some type of joke about we have pretty like the pretty woman can't hurt you, but um I don't know if that translates as well. Anyways, libraries. And we were watching uh Memories, the anthology. There we go. On last Sunday. So it does feel like it's been a minute since I streamed on YouTube, but we're going to be continuing our watch party streak on Discord every Sunday. And I think next week, or this coming Sunday, it's going to be the second installment because we split the Memories film up into 3 parts because the first one was Magnetic Rose, which is about 45 minutes. The second one is actually called Stink Bomb, which is about 30-ish minutes, and then we're going to discuss after. So Shadow. Shadow. Safety. I feel like I should assume you're probably not wearing a life jacket. I would advise you to wear a life jacket for your safety. Please. But yeah. So sorry. I was streaming for work earlier and I know that my voice is gonna go out. I can feel it. But let's see. Libraries. Okay, so we were doing watch parties, and that is one reason that I've kind of like haven't been on here as much. We are going to continue with our watch party series and keep watching different movies or like TV show episodes. So far, I think a lot of the ones that people have been excited about are anime, which I am always happy to watch. Ellie. Ugh. I understand that, but there is a line between being like between not acknowledging yourself and being conceited. There's a very big difference. Ellie, I have a feeling that that is exactly the part of you and the component of you that she may feel the most safe with. I know, again, I don't know anything about this person. I am assuming a lot and I am extrapolating, but I will say we have a habit of finding one another. So, yes, that. I feel like if the most important thing is being honest and aware of who you are and recognizing, yes, exactly as Aqua said, and as Brant said, 110%. If that is something that she is not truly comfortable with, then that is a reflection of her and not you. That is not a reflection on your worth at all. And somebody being conventionally attractive shouldn't be the factor or the big factor in how well you get along. Your personality should be your sense of morals, your sense of humor, the things that you find interesting and the ways that you are curious about the world. Those are what actually matter, significantly more. And again, yeah, exactly as Brent and Aqua said, if she's not actually comfortable with you for who you truly are, then she's not the right person. And that's her loss in every way. Not this. ASMR. You got this. I can't do that. I'm sorry. My voice is not good enough for this. Um, also, I don't know if this mic is the right one for that. But anyways, when we are okay, so for today, oh my gosh, y'all. What is with my brain? Blah, blah, blah. So humans, libraries. That's it. We are going to be talking a little bit about libraries and the concept of third spaces, as well as the connection between libraries and third spaces, as the kind of idea of libraries being accessible is becoming a topic of conversation again. At least I've noticed a lot more commentary about what libraries are capable of, that for anyone who didn't know, they're okay, so basically the power of the library is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation in social media spaces. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you do have libraries making very purposeful social media forays into promotion. And that was not really something that I think I guess I could say it wasn't something that you saw as often. Like, I definitely knew that there was content around me that was supporting, trying to encourage the use of libraries and the continued support of libraries as a public service. But seeing that online was not something I was as used to. And I've only just recently, maybe within the last few weeks, been seeing at much content about that. So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to look back at the history of libraries and how long they have been a component of human society, as well as our concept of them as being a public space that has been an institution and a core component of our societal structure. Because I always assumed that libraries had always been public. And I was wrong. I was actually very wrong. So originally, the very first libraries apparently were created in Mesopotamia, and they were very specific. They were limited to subjects that were based on religion, based on the goings on of the royal authorities and governance. And then there were private libraries that were specific to very wealthy individuals, or more often royal individuals. Hi, RM. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, Brent, is I always remembered them as both. But what I didn't realize is that there is a radical difference since the introduction of screens at much younger ages, with the general comfort of reading physical books. And at the same time, I always remember there being this big conversation about like the environment and using or being able to save the, or not save, lessen the impact on an environmental scale by shifting to more digital means. And now digital libraries are some of the only spaces that are wholeheartedly keeping the source of information that we have globally alive. You also have phenomena like the Internet Archive, which is functioning as a library for the internet. Yes, exactly. It was always both in your hometown. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I remember in high school that was that was a thing that you could do, but the only people I ever knew who would go to the library to connect with other people were often kicked out, because there was an assumption that if a group of us kind of came to the library, we wouldn't be respectful of the space and instead would, oh, that was middle school, not high school. There was this whole contentious conversation about whether teenage kids should be allowed to go unsupervised to libraries after school and wait until it was time to kind of go home and they could get into their homes because their parents maybe were working until much later. And there was this whole conversation about how a lot of kids were extraordinarily disrespectful of the space and they didn't often recognize the importance of maintaining a more quiet environment, and they would leave a lot of mess, or they would write on the desks or on the shelves. And there were some kids who would write in the books, but that was kind of my assumption with libraries, is that they weren't supposed to really be, they were supposed to be a storage space for information, but they were also supposed to be a space where you treated it with reverence, and anybody who didn't was seen as uncouth and even dangerous, even when you were like 11. And that was a surprising, maybe a surprising fact that I had to kind of come to terms with, is that when I started going by myself as a kid, there was definitely that sense of like, oh, are you going to try and steal the books? But that may have been very much because of the particular space I was in. Yeah. Um, but there was also, I think that was at a point where there weren't many, where a lot of people just assumed, well, you've got your computers, you've got your phones, what are you doing going to a library? You can look up anything that you need. Um, you don't even need to be here, and you're just causing, what was it? Causing a ruckus. And I think that that is a concept that was pretty ingrained for me about how the most most people viewed libraries in context of third spaces, where they weren't supposed to be necessarily third spaces. They were supposed to be a structured environment that kept information and you could use specifically for that information. Um, but at the same time, I would notice that there would be different groups of kids who could comfortably come in without getting side-eyed or getting asked to leave. And there were sometimes certain differences in assumed class with those different groups. And this is still within the same school. And it, it's not that either group would like comport themselves better or worse in those spaces. But there was definitely an assumption that I think I brought with me. So I would always treat libraries, even, I've been raised to treat libraries as these kind of venerable spaces, but I also treated them as a space where I had to be very much aware that I could get in trouble very quickly if I was too loud. And so I was very quiet when I was in those spaces. Um, but I, as I kind of went back through the history of libraries in general, I could see where this assumption of class distinction does still maintain itself in the form of how libraries are accessible, because originally they were not supposed to be accessible to the public. You could have the royal library, you could have the religious libraries, and then you could have the governing libraries. And that was how people had access to information. But the people who had access to that information were not going to be the average person, and wealth was not necessarily enough to gain access. But in the 300th BCE, that's when the Library of Alexandria, oh my gosh, Alexandria was opened. And it was actually, I didn't know this, it was after the death of Alexander the Great. One of his top generals, Ptolemy, opened the Library of Alexandria as a political strategy to ensure the legacy of Alexander the Great lived on, because he was essentially able to spot the importance of the of information being accessible to many people as a way of ensuring dynastic support, and also almost canonizing on a social level figures. And so he opened the library and also created what is largely considered to be one of the very first public libraries in the world, where technically you could come in and look at texts and other sources of information, which were in scroll form at that time, but the scrolls weren't to be taken out. They weren't supposed to be taken home. You could look at them then, and with the aid of a scholar who could either guide you through those scrolls, or you could essentially focus on your education in the context of that space for that short period of time. And you had to have the right kind of social access to be able to stay for longer. But technically, those spaces were still open. It also did help encourage the, I guess, a stronger interest on a social and public level in being able to read and having the capability of involving yourself in history or teaching oneself about history or religious texts. But there were still very much political implications and political influence in the type of texts that were available. Now, the Library of Alexandria was very famed because it was one of the libraries that started gathering information from all around the world. Now, originally, libraries actually were a collection of colonized texts. They were a way to gather all of the information of all of the places that Alexander the Great had colonized and maintain a source of information about those cultures, so that but also so that, as his general is the one who started the library, other future members of military strategy and rulers could educate themselves about the territories that they now owned and find a way to ensure that they were educated about how to govern those spaces. Because Alexander the Great was very, very well known for purposely conquering spaces and then installing a few key members of his kind of loyalist, what do you call them, figures, and maintaining the general structure of the people who he had conquered, and then slowly instituting almost like a, what do you call it, gentrification of his people into those spaces, while still, again, maintaining the space in the culture and the rules and legal systems of those countries and those communities, because it was the most effective way to maintain rule over a space for the longest amount of time. Because if you tried to completely obliterate it, all you ensured was anybody who did survive was gonna come back after you, and they were gonna be mad. So this way, he was able to maintain a source of information. Now, eventually, that source of information became the Library of Alexandria, which, when was it Julius Caesar was escaping or attempting to overtake Egypt, he burned the port, and that led to the burning of the Library of Alexandria, which also led to the destruction of one of the only sources in the world that had the largest amount of information about communities and cultures that the Alexander the Great had either interest in or had involved himself in some way. And because of his colonization of those spaces, the cultures that came before eventually became lost to time, which is very sad. Um, Yay! Okay, Shadow, I'm glad you're home. Thank you. And yes, I will lecture you every time, Shadow. I will lecture you every single time because I want you to be safe. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. You went to UPenn or Penn State? Oh, Penn State. I've never been to Penn State. Um, that's terrifying. And of course, Ellie, I am so happy to be able to provide any type of like support or maybe even context. But helpful. Is helpful. Okay. Here. Um yeah. I'm happy to be able to provide any kind of like support or context in relation to anything that you might need. Um and good. Shadow, you should definitely let yourself rest and refuel and recalibrate and do all the things. Whoa. Whew. Ah. Whoa. That's wild. That's so cool. Well, I hope you have a really relaxing rest of your evening and you just let yourself reform after being melted by the sun and then driving a lot. So, yes. Yay. But okay. So, the original libraries. Now, the library in Mesopotamia and the libraries in Mesopotamia, I cannot speak to in regards to colonization and if they operated in the same manner, or if they were merely a way to record what was happening within the structure of Mesopotamian society. But when it comes to the Library of Alexandria, that is a very different conversation. There was absolutely a lot of colonization involved in the creation of that library and ultimately its eventual destruction. But that was not the only one. There were also libraries in what became modern day Iraq, and throughout West Asia, South Asia, and the like Northern African and throughout various kind of African countries and territories that were not always identified as to the same level as the Library of Alexandria, but it's still to this day considered one of the most important community cultural centers and establishments on history and mathematics in terms of gathering resources and information that many others may have not felt were important because they didn't that type of information wasn't always seen as relevant to the religious assumptions of the time period. So there were a lot of really important foundational principles that the Library of Alexandria did model for libraries in the future. And that became more of a popular structure. What's interesting is that over time, the general system of how a library operated didn't actually change that much until the beginning of the printing press. And not to say that there wasn't changes, rather just that as time moved on, the general structure of using a library as a way to operate as part museum, part social club, part method of organizing relevant texts around major world affairs and massive discoveries in science or history was largely maintained for many years through the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and then all the way to like 17th century kind of European colonization and the era of colonization. So what ends up happening is in order to it is relaxing. That is what relaxing is. Shadow. Going to bed is relaxing. It's unwinding. It's letting your brain and your body relax and rest and recalibrate. So, but okay. So there's another role that libraries played because there were from the library in Alexandria, something did shift as well in the general consensus of what a library meant to a society. So with the shifting of the role of a library from being a purely class divided space that was exclusively for those of governance and royal distinction and religious distinction, it became a place that was a measure of society and the strength of that society. So libraries actually became, especially after the burning of the Library of Alexandria, which some attributed to the ultimate destruction of the concept of Alexander the Great's empire and the domination of the Roman Empire. The space that libraries held on a social level became extraordinarily important. So a lot of different rulers started to basically want to have their own. If they were an empire, they like the Byzantine Empire eventually wanted to have a massive library to rival that of the Library of Alexandria, and they had the Imperial Library of Constantinople, which was in the 4th century. And they called it the House of Wisdom, which is, again, a way to establish almost like an identification of a community as a successful community. You see the same thing happen in Baghdad in the 9th century, which ultimately colonization was the destructor of, and that keeps happening. You keep having these libraries become these spaces of almost like a way to show off a community wealth. So the more books that you can collect, the more information you can get, also is an indicator of the spaces that you now have access to gather that information, which also could translate to conquest and colonization of those spaces, because you can't get access to information that you don't already have unless you are actively involving yourselves with, especially at that time period, with the alternative options that may have been there because of another kingdom's source of information. So that, Brant, that it would be terrible, which is kind of what his goal is, when it comes to all of the laws he's trying to pass about the internet, and Project 2025 is trying to pass about the internet right now. It's a huge reason that Palantir is so involved, and that you have these major tech companies that are getting themselves involved in the flow of information. Because if you can control what people remember, you can control what people have believe. So is a very real possibility that many of the things that we assume we know about various historical facts could be wrong, because we're assuming based on a narrative that has been able to survive from various periods in history. There's many different points in history where you could say, well, did we know that that happened? Because the thing is, history is written by the victors. So, for example, the fact that, like, some of the things that we know now about more ancient civilizations that we would consider horrific, for example, colonization, was not considered as such at the time. So it wasn't something that people would hide about how they had accomplished their goal of expanding an empire. It would be seen as a show of strength, as a form of recognizing the capability of a ruler and an empire. You can see it with who's it, King Leopold of Belgium, and his horrific, just inhumane treatment of the Congolese people. He did not care that there was a lot of record about how evil he was, because it wasn't seen at that time as bad because of racism. Now, eventually things shifted enough within, I think, his lifetime and the lifetime of especially his descendants, that there was an active attempt to shift the narrative about exactly how cruel he was. But when we think about it, you know, a lot of us were taught about Christopher Columbus, and, you know, how he came to the US because he thought that he was going to India, and it's kind of like, oh, haha, oopsie. And they know, you don't get taught in school most of the time about his absolutely inhumane treatment of the indigenous populations here, and his purposeful genocide of them, or the way that he was incomprehensibly cruel to the native populations here. Yeah, that's exactly like you said, Brent. Yes, it's a free press is exactly important for these reasons. Now, what's funny is that libraries used to be essentially a space where, because they were withheld from the general public on a large scale, and the only people who were able to access them still had to have a standing in society based on the rules of that society, which up until um, much more recently, like US recently, the concept of a person having standing in society was directly tied to whether or not they owned land and had a certain amount of capital, and even more so if they had noble titles. Being a merchant was not necessarily, like, having a lot of money was not necessarily enough to guarantee or garner even an invitation or an opening of the spaces that held information. And it wasn't until significantly more recently where things like those rules relaxed or shifted. And libraries used to be kind of a bastion of information resource for people who were not going to be as uncomfortable with the information included inside about whole populations and civilizations that perhaps were destroyed by previous rulers or by the rulers who compiled the libraries themselves. So there's a interesting perspective where, before the onset of public libraries that were truly fully public, where you could take books home, and there was also an interest in what the readers or the people who attended the library wanted to see. It was very different before then, where instead the sole purpose was to gather as much text as possible and information as possible. And there were often political agendas behind the type of text that would be gathered. But it was also not meant to really be seen by people who would have scruples about it or be uncomfortable with it. It was meant to be seen by the rulers who would benefit from that information because they would be able to use it to more effectively maintain their control over a space that had been colonized by the ruler before them, or that they were actively attempting to colonize at that point. So they were started out with a very different structure. And there was also still a lot of religious dogma involved in what type of information was allowed to be saved. So what does actually end up shifting, though, is that there was this mentality as the library became a space that became more and more accessible for people who had capital, that there was a sincere fear that people would steal the books. So they would chain the books to the shelves. You could not walk into another room with those books. You definitely couldn't take them outside, but you absolutely could not just leave with them. It was it was like a fortress for books and for information and maps and historical artifacts and the things that had been gathered on conquests. So there was definitely part museum, and it was part information stronghold, but it was also a space to strategize and have easy access for higher members of, like, level members of government to interact with one another with access to the information that they would need to be able to maintain the governance that they had or adjust governance that they had. So it was an interesting space because you kind of had all of the components of like a fancy club, um, without maybe alcohol and entertainment. The entertainment instead was like learning about things in order to make decisions about um, major political moves. And it's often related to military adventures or military goals. So the library, which now, and at least in the way that I perceive the library, has always been about access to fantastical worlds, fantasy-based stories, fiction stories that kind of teach you a little bit. That was not as much my interest with the library. It was always about the stories instead of about the history. And that was not where that was not how this started out. It did not start out that way at all. Nobody was interested in stories. They maybe would keep them for posterity's sake to as an like a sociological and you call it anthropological. I don't know if I said that right. Um, way of evaluating various communities and cultures to understand them better, to be able to rule over them better and maintain military strategies. But the value of that art for being art wasn't always highlighted. And that is still actually a relatively recent thing. All of that has also had to do with the fact that there was a distinct interest. I did at the end. Wait, what did I do? Um, but there was like a distinct interest in collecting all that information. But another component of libraries wasn't just what was inside it, it was the buildings themselves. From the Library of Alexandria to the House of Wisdom in Constantinople to the Great Library of Baghdad, they were all built to be extraordinarily impressive buildings that were like major architectural like feats of ingenuity in order to again like essentially occupy a space in the social realm and in the international realm of, uh, I guess you could say, peacocking in politics, where measuring a society based on the ways that they can essentially waste money is always and has always been a way that certain rulers have been able to show off their strength and dissuade political dissent. Because if you are in a space where all of the buildings are very impressive, it's going to feel a lot harder to, say, hatch a coup. Exactly, Brant. Oh, I did. I did. I said anthropological. Yes. I'm glad I did it right. Anthropological. Um, Thank you. And that was a beginning component where, people from all over the communities that had these libraries and the empires that had these libraries began wanting to visit the libraries because they're these beautiful buildings. A lot of time and money has been put into creating them. And they also have this air of access to wealth and power and the sources of that wealth and power. So a lot of people started, the average person wanted to start trying to go there, and visitors who were visiting the basically tourists of all eras, they see big pretty building and they say, oh, can I go in? And that has never changed. And that, I mean, I understand, I am guilty of it as well. But yeah, so they became like a really important component of how cities were planned. And so you often see libraries in spaces that are very central to city centers. And also around them, you see spaces of like streets for entertainment, for having food and drink, and all kinds of community focus that centered in close proximity to the libraries, so that they could have essentially get access to some of the wealthiest people in the community, in those empires, because who would be passing between the library and around but people who either worked for the government, worked for the military, were royal, or were in some way involved with the library itself. And those people need to be fed, and they sometimes need a night off where when they're leaving work, they may want to stop by a theater, they may want to stop by a pub, or they might want to go in and grab a cute trinket or something. So you'd see these spaces start to flourish around libraries, where it becomes this involved connection between, if there's a library, there's also probably going to be a main street area with like the city's cultural centers springing up around it, and then also trying to essentially garner interest by having equally as beautiful or impressive buildings. And there was also interest on a city planning level in maintaining that structure, so that you could have kind of a concentrated area that became a major spot for impressing foreign dignitaries, visitors from other countries or from outside of the city, and also to maintain a sense of identity within each space. Yes, Allie, yes. Ah, all the books that haven't been written yet. I remember reading, total tangent. I remember reading this one interpretation of Beauty and the Beast where um Belle is looking through the Beast's library, and his library is actually full of all these books that have never, that in her era haven't been written yet, that are talking about modern day things. They're like major books that were released, um, you know, long past the, what was it, the mid 1800s, for when they were supposed to, or the, yeah, when they were supposed to have been around. I thought that was so cool. But also, that's the another thing is, in a lot of media about noble spaces and noble houses, they operated and were inspired to have their own libraries. and become that same structure on their estates for the spaces that they were living in. So you would have like the main big city center where you'd have the big library, like in the House of Wisdom in Constantinople. And you would have like the wealthy areas that people would live close by in the city. But a lot of like nobles may have also had a other residence that was farther out in the countryside, and those residences would be grander estates or larger spaces, and they would make a point to establish themselves within the territories that they were responsible for of recreating that same structure. So they would recreate their home in these, like in their the areas that they were, like the nobles were responsible for, as the same. So they would have like they would have a library that maybe certain, not everybody had access to, but you would have a private library, and then you would have a public space of library that would have documents relating to how the estate and the territory was run, and it would have like historical records, ledgers, all those types of things that maybe if you were involved in the governance of that particular space, you would have access to. And if you were involved in the, what do you call it, the security of that space, you would probably also have access to those kinds of libraries that the nobles owned in their main estates in the areas that they also owned. Because the ways that nobility worked, it wasn't just like your title was a title of land that you were responsible for, and that you would also garner you wealth. So if is essentially like levels of landlords. It's like being the landlord of a small room is a very low level noble, and then you have the different like levels of noble until you've got the landlord of an entire city centers, like multiple different buildings that create its own little city. That would be like a much higher level of landlord. And then a king is like the ultimate landlord because they own the whole entire country. Or and then an emperor owns a bunch of different countries. So it's all levels of ownership and maintaining access to information as a form of ownership, which is fascinating to me because I think that in my modern mentality, libraries are the opposite. They're a way to kind of circumnavigate governing bodies and governing expectations about information. You could go to the library to learn things that you wouldn't have access to if you are in a space that has a lot of religious dogma and doesn't want certain types of information available. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Aqua. 110% yes. That would be nice. That would be fantastic. Oh my god, if only. But the biggest shift in, like, this kind of operated for a while where you had libraries functioning as these main attractions for tourists and visitors, um, and a space of cultural gathering and inspiration that also operated almost like a closed off government building that still had a strong force the in the cultural landscape and the cityscape of the major like empires that had their major kind of major why am I forgetting all my words today? But major spaces. And it became a really, really important military strategy to destroy the other side's libraries, because you would also destroy their information about how to navigate and govern their own spaces. So it became like an interesting thing of like, if you could afford to, if you truly wanted to blow that country off the face of the earth, if you destroyed their library in full, then it weakened public confidence and social morale and soldiers' morale, and it also weakened the actual effective governing arm of the enemy's military capability and their strategic arm. But if you wanted to maintain the country afterwards, you would destroy certain components of the library so that you could still rescue the information inside. If they are good people, Brant, that is the biggest if. Oh my gosh, Ellie, yes. That was brilliant. That was brilliant, and I loved it. That was fantastic. Ah, so good. But what happens, like that kind of continues on for a while, where libraries operate as a space of colonial conquest. They operate as a way to maintain certain social orders. They operate as a political mechanism to affect social dogma, and they also operate as a source of record keeping and venerance for information, uh, and a political and military touch point for essentially winning, for the concept of having been able to truly overcome another space. Because if you're able to get to the point of a city where their library is, you're in the center of it. You're at the seat. You're not you're not in the palace, but you are almost there. And right though, Brant. Ugh. Ugh. Oh. But things continue like this for several more centuries. There is a period of time in the Dark Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, the medieval era, where libraries and books are not seen as important outside of religious texts, especially as various advents of science start to really get people nervous about the ways that people can question the religious dogma of the Christianity at the time in favor of the possibility of alternative information. So the only people who had access to libraries were, especially with the sweeping effect of religion and Christianity specifically across the European spaces, the European countries. There we go. And as well, their attempt to maintain that sweeping effect and go even farther towards other areas that previously had been unaffected by the rise in Christianity. They were effective because one of the big things they did is they would go after the information and the libraries of opposing empires, opposing groups, and they would take that information and the church would hold on to it, and they would have it as very important information that they would replicate that same structure. But instead of there being the idea of there being a, say, like a religious library and then a royal library and then maybe people's private libraries, it became really important that that was all in one space and centered through the political needs of the religious dogma that was taking over Europe. And so that became a very normalized and very structured method. And you see that with the Vatican Library when that becomes the next biggest library after Baghdad in the 9th century to take over the role of record keeper and information broker, essentially, for the shifted space of the modern world, which went from being in like the kind of South Asia and West Asia up to Europe, especially as the Roman Empire fell. So you have northern Africa, West Asia, and this whole area as the kind of cradle of information and advancement and civilization. And then Christianity kind of has a huge impact on that process and kind of cuts itself off in many ways, and also does its best to take over the spaces and the information that was available, um, and become a center space. And it does, and then it uses colonization through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. You see this massive shift where it restructures the center of essentially informational growth and educational growth in Europe, and encourages colonization throughout the rest of the world, and also takes a lot of the information that these previous strongholds had and removes them from where they were to where some of them still are today, which is in European spaces, museums, and libraries. And it's not until the 17th century when the popularization, I'm getting better at this enunciating thing, popularization of the printing press for larger amounts of books outside of the Bible and religious texts and newspapers becomes cheaper and more available, that you start to see this big shift in the kinds of texts that people want. Because before, you could have one copy of a book because everything had to be handwritten, right? So you had one copy of the book was chained to the shelf, because if it got stolen, that was it was gone, unless somebody went through and physically copied all of the books more than once. Yes, yes. I love John Oliver. He's so good at all the things. Um, he's very effective. He's a very effective uh, source of information. And I do appreciate his delivery. It's always very appreciated. But yes. So, oh, okay. So I forgot about this. The world's oldest library is actually at the University of Morocco, which started in 859. Wow. Okay. So the kind of structure that had been established, from Mesopotamia to the Library of Alexandria to the House of Wisdom in Constantinople to the Great Library of Baghdad, was restructured and done by the Vatican in the late 1400s. And then they continued to maintain the kind of status as being the core holders of information in relation to math and science and history, as well as religious texts, and even yeah, and even just like what basic state functions and how things changed. But because of the shifting of how books were made, where they went from being handwritten to being printed, you could have more than one copy of a book, which before hadn't been possible. It really shifted how libraries became accessible to the masses. Now, it still took a really long time for libraries to actually become accessible to the masses in truth, because a lot of people still didn't know how to read. There was a general form of schooling that actually Charlemagne had been one of the first people to institute, but at least in Europe. But it wasn't in Europe as common for most people, especially if you didn't have access to wealth and money, to be educated. So the people who were educated were generally of extraordinarily wealthy or of noble class or royal. And so that maintained this kind of like strict rule about who was able to even access books or appreciate them if they could. So what's changed is money. So actually, in the 18th century, as public access to books changed, because access to To a degree, yes. It's both. It's both, Ellie. And I think that's why it's so important to see multiple perspectives and then gather from there, because there are a lot of stories that are written by the victor that are favorable to the victor. And it's not until you get a chance to see the stories of the conquered that you actually see a more nuanced portrayal of what happened. But also, sometimes, in order to maintain political um, dogmas or religious dogmas or both, sometimes facts would be completely altered. Uh, you could see that in everything from newspapers to books written about how people even would acknowledge certain facts. Um, Even in like through the 18th century to the 19th century, there was one major big shift where libraries, because the books started becoming more accessible, started to be seen as a financial opportunity. So wealthier nobles who wanted to have an easier access to the libraries without having to spend all of their money just on gathering books for their own spaces would essentially pool their money to run a library. And it was a way to operate, yay! It was a way to operate as a kind of philanthropic good for their communities, while also reducing some of the financial burden that they had on like maintaining these texts and the access to those texts. And so that began a new form of this concept of a library not just being held by certain groups of people, but instead being more accessible in a public way. Now, this eventually inspired Bill, who was it, Benjamin Franklin in the U.S. And the U.S. is actually one of the spaces that had the most recognizable forms of library systems because, yes, exactly, Brant, indeed. Because what Benjamin Franklin started to do is, in the spirit of creating a new country that was not like former countries and had this idea of the free, equal man in antithesis to the very strict feudal system that Benjamin Franklin and everybody that he knew had ever grown up with, he decided with a group of other scholars and statespeople and various members of the colonies to essentially create a library system based on subscriptions. So you had to pay in order to be involved and have access to books. And you still couldn't necessarily take the books home, but it was the first space where the group that he created listened to what people wanted to read. Because up until then, it's not like you could say, you know, it'd be really nice if you had this book, and they would listen. They wouldn't cater to what people were interested in. You went to the library because that was the only place information was that was recorded. So that's also why you would see libraries have newspapers. A bunch of newspapers is a way to record information. Yeah, they are. They are. Um, and then it expanded. So then the bring home thing started. So what people would do is they would, as they kind of shifted their rates, people would spend more to be able to bring books home. And that's where things really took off. But one of the biggest shifts after this was the who was it? Carnegie. It was Andrew Carnegie. Yes. So there's this interesting, before I get to that, there's this interesting symbiotic relationship between mass printing and libraries and their development, where on one hand, the printing press did start encouraging more people, like eventually Benjamin Franklin, to feel confident in investing in a library system. And it encouraged more authors to write novels because they could actually get financial compensation for them instead of publishing them in basically chapters in magazines. So there was more incentive for there to be a support system to actually write novels. And then you'd have this other thing going back and forth where the community would then say, wait, you're going to write, it's going to be a novel that I can read that's about stories? I want that. That sounds cool. And then I can keep it. Okay, let's do it. And you could then have multiple copies. So many different people could have the same book. And it led to the beginning of I think, the way that the book industry has, I guess, the very beginning of how the book industry is recognizable into today's structure. Yes, oil bear. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then, possibly as a tax haven, you see this thing happening where the more that people start investing in libraries and library systems and subscription-based library systems, the more printing is trying to keep up. So it actually encourages one another until you have this like explosion in printing because more and more people are also learning at younger and younger ages how to read. And you also are starting to have women more significantly involved in the process of writing books and reading them and also being sold to, especially within the US, which affects the global market because if that's how capitalism works, if a ideological prejudice is not useful because you're not making money, then you can change it. That's how capitalism kind of encourages it. So whereas before there was a very strong assumption that women would not want to read because they shouldn't be allowed to, once people realized, oh, you could charge them a lot of money to read and then they would have to pay for that, then that started to change, and an entire genre of the types of books that could be seen as acceptable for women to read was born, and it just grew from there. And then you, again, as well with novels, you start to see, and you started to see that a little bit with the concept of like kind of stories in newspapers that maybe would get a chance, because newspapers were one of the original ways that people had an opportunity to indulge in fiction and fantasy and have access to that in a large scale, because it was a lot harder to do that without maintaining, unless you were maintaining like oral traditions or community-based storytelling through community events. But having a recorded form of a story was different and a little bit harder to do on a mass scale. Um, so in the 19th century, as you see this kind of budding growth of both printing and library systems, especially in the colonies, which then starts to get adapted and adopted throughout Europe, slowly, but it gets there. Who is it? Yeah, yes, Andrew Carnegie actually ends up using his wealth to open 1,183 libraries throughout the US in the mid 19th century, which is nuts because he didn't do it just in the US, he did it all over the world. And he, well, no, not all over the world. He did it in various areas in the world that were, he probably thought were, because he was racist. But yes, but he did contribute to the kind of normalization of the library system. And in the library structure that he created, where he took what Ben Franklin had and his group had done, he shifted it even more so that you didn't have to pay to access the library, and there would be more books that would be more interesting to the average person. So you'd have a lot more novels and stories, and not just kind of the tomes about history and statescraft and military strategy and religious texts and um, chronicles of how your local dominion worked, things like that. You would have things that'd be more interesting, and it's mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot, and that was a big shift. But what was nuts is there was still extreme racism in who was allowed to have access to a library. It were white only spaces for a long time, from the mid 19th century until I think it was like the 19, and when I say 19th century, that means technically like 18 something something going into. So it's like almost like 100-ish years, like a very long time before there was any inroads made on allowing um, anyone of color access to the books themselves. And even though they were supposed to be open, safe spaces for people to gather information, check out books, learn new things, they started again replicating that community center space just as they had in, you know, Constantinople and in Baghdad and in Alexandria, of them being city center spaces. You started to see libraries in main city centers and then community events happening at those spaces. And as they became more popular, you started to see branches of libraries budding up in all these different neighborhoods as cities got bigger, um, especially throughout the US. Yeah, the access to the libraries is very much based on tax bracket and revenue of the environment where they are funded. So, yep. Yeah, Ellie. Yeah. It's always, there's always, yep. But that is so nuts to me because it then took, I guess the heyday of libraries was throughout whew, the maybe about, there was like a 40 to 50-year period from the 40s until the early 2000s with the onset of the internet, where you saw people using libraries as a main source of information, but also a main source of community gathering, and a beginning of a shift when it came to racial politics as well and racial dynamics. Libraries were one of the few spaces where, when they had profound segregation, if you were of color, you were still allowed to enter a library and use a bathroom. Whereas in so many other areas that were considered city centers, if you were of color, you were not supposed to even walk inside a lot of spaces, um, which is why it was so such a profound protest to do something as simple as go to a diner and eat food or sit at the counter at a diner. Um, and that is a whole other conversation. But again, it's all interrelated, like city planning and the importance of access to information is all related to a way to structure one's society to maintain rule for and power for very specific groups. So libraries are really fascinating because now libraries are, due to the onset of information being shifted from physical media to online, we now have library spaces like Wikipedia, which is essentially kind of like a giant, it is a giant encyclopedia, but it is also publicly like editable, Apple. So the information you get on there, you'll have to take with a grain of salt. But there's still now online resources to be able to access information from all over the world that even libraries wouldn't always have an easy time accessing. So there became a real need because libraries didn't have the same opportunity for structural racism to start losing that sense of racist prejudice. And so you did start to see a shift in purposeful programming for all communities instead of just select specific communities based on race. And in some ways, it has maintained, like, the communities that are the most involved in using libraries are the ones that were the least appreciated for the longest. Now, libraries are interestingly visited, cannot talk today, visited, visit words, anyways, by a lot more people than have gone to baseball games in the last year. I can't remember, is it 3,000? No, something 66, 366 something. More people have, or at least the range of people who have gone to libraries yearly is significantly higher than who go to like major stadiums for major events. And libraries are a space that are often underfunded and seem to be underutilized, but are one of the core components of most communities in terms of having access to community-based events and structured spaces for essentially free access for gathering. And so they've definitely shifted hugely, where before that community gathering had to be done outside the doors of the library because the inside was reserved for people of very specific class and status. Now, a lot of that has moved inside. And as that has happened, the buildings themselves have become significantly less impressive than they once were, and less giant than they once were. It is significantly more common to see a kind of small neighborhood library that has, based on the community of that space, is maintained almost, I think, a lot of times on volunteer support because the taxes collected are generally not enough. I know. I know, Ellie. Well, we have so many examples of socialist structures. Like, who was it? Mitt Romney was suggesting, and so was Trump, was suggesting a. No, it was Mitt Romney, was suggesting a socialist healthcare system. And Obama adopted it. And when he got into office, and made a few small changes, but it was almost the same system. And it became absolutely derided as Obamacare. But it was an attempt to work towards a free healthcare and socialized healthcare. And it was made by a Republican. So, yeah. I think people just get very fired up about the idea versus inspecting. Yeah, and okay, yes. So Romney also passed that exact system in Massachusetts, and then it was kind of extrapolated into Obamacare when Obama won. Yes. So there is so much to how libraries and their function in society confounded what I assumed about what they used to mean. Because I kind of always thought that they were that that space that people, it was like people, there was very always a strict librarian who would tell you to shh, and you couldn't talk in, but you also had it was kind of like a safe space to go that was free. And it wasn't that way until relatively recently. Like, in some ways, the libraries that we know of as these free resources are maybe the best thing about the United States. Of course, we're defunding them. Um, so it's fascinating to me that it has so much of the development of libraries into third spaces is a distinctly American phenomenon. But oh man, it's already that time. Oh no. Okay. All right. So I think when it comes to kind of looking back at libraries, what's important is about them is the ultimate function that they have always had in society is an opportunity to connect to information and educate yourself. But we have the ability of being horrified by the information we find because we're not the military strategists or the dynasties trying to maintain the control over a colonized space. Instead, we can use the information that we find to push back against the structures and the systems that think that colonization is okay or warranted. Yes, that's true, Ellie. That is very true. It is incredibly important to make sure that you have books because you, it is, control of information is always the most effective way to establish rule of law in a space. And when you don't have like the ability to control the flow of information, it can, and especially the true facts of what may or may have happened in a community, it can radically change who has power and how they have power and how that community is run. So when you have the facts of a situation, it gives you an opportunity to make a more objective decision about what may have happened in the past and any patterns you might be seeing in the present that you can watch out for and make more educated decisions about. That's, I think, I am curious about the relationship between the development of the library system and the costs of college. And I'm wondering, I have like no idea about this, but like I'm wondering if the rising costs of college have had any effect on the library system or vice versa. But yep, that exactly. So what's interesting is now you have internet libraries like the Internet Archivist that are functioning in the same way with the very core idea of operating as a democratic or even socialist function of free access to information, regardless of what that information is, because it is a true account of what happened that is not, hopefully, not biased, because it includes all the perspectives of an account about what happened. And I think that type of situation is extraordinarily important to maintain because we now have a whole new realm of information that is being passed back and forth every day, and that's on the internet. And we also have digitized media for things that have been lost, like physical media that has been lost. And that is, as especially physical media, certain pieces of physical media are becoming harder and harder to maintain as time goes on, and they were not built to last for centuries. There is value in maintaining that type of information by finding a way to digitize it and then making sure that access to that information is truly accessible to anybody who would like to have it. But I think that that is maybe where we will pause for today. I know we didn't talk as much about third spaces, but I thought talking about the library system was too interesting to not, especially with challenging and kind of confounding maybe my own assumptions about how libraries functioned on a societal level. And if you had any that were challenged, I would love to know. But yeah, I don't know. You never know. You never know. I think ultimately the patterns of human nature are very telling because we often try to control information in moments of greed, and it always comes back to bite us. As a species, it always comes back somehow because you never know who is recording information and how it's being recorded. So keep that in mind. Okay. All right. Thank you everybody for jumping in tonight. I know today was a very meandering day and my brain was like boop 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 boop. I don't even know what that is. But there we are. So thank you so much for jumping in, and I will see you all for our Sunday stream on Discord. If you don't have my Discord, I'm putting it in the thingamajig right now, so you can jump in and watch stuff. And what I'm going to try and do this time, because every time I try to stream a thing on Discord, I will see if there is a way to kind of have like an open watch party. So if you don't have Discord, you can perhaps still watch with us. Ta-da! There we go. I am trying to. I am trying desperately to. I will say it is very hard to get away from because that would require a lot of people to move, and getting that to happen is hard. But I am working on, I think one of the biggest issues I'm running into is how hard it is to move to a new platform when there isn't anything there and their community has been built on a different space. All of the components of that community, like the library, is going to be gone and scrubbed. And if I close the server, then it's gone. So finding a way to be able to take that information and move it is important, I think, for maintaining the community as it is. Because I think what I've realized is that moving hosting platforms can absolutely scatter anybody who is involved, regardless of how dedicated they are. So change is hard. Yeah. I did put a lot of work into making a Stoat server, so I do have one. It's just, I think getting it's got all the bones, but it doesn't have the components that make it breathe. So I'm still working on it. But I do know that the ultimate goal of when the kind of Discord is going to become totally unusable is, fortunately, as far as I can tell, still a few months away. Pigeon mailing systems. You're right, Ellie. You're right. We could. Ordo would probably try and eat the pigeons, so maybe not. But smoke signals. There we go. That would work. That would work. That's a good idea. Or we could use Stoat. I don't know. Thank you, Shadow. Thank you, thank you. It's pink. It's pink. I got it to be pink. It's cute. It's cute. I mean, okay, anyways. I will work on that. And that? She was mad at me. Okay. Odo is telling me to go. Palantir? Wait, what? Wait. What does that mean? It's a paladin. Oh, thank you, Shadow. Oh, I get it now. Oh my god, that would be hilarious. That would be hilarious. That would be absolutely hilarious. Part of me thinks that would be fantastic for the plot. Part of me knows no. Can you imagine if I had a little ball that I could like, and then I could, no, nope, no, nope, no, nope. Okay. Anyways, aloe is amazing. Shadow, please, please, please use it. Even if you have to like, if you can't go get it, if you don't have any, have it brought to you. It is important. This will make a massive shift and change in how you feel. So please get yourself some aloe. Okay. Anyways, I will be seeing you all for now on Discord until I can get you all to move to Stoat. We'll see. But we can do watch parties on Stoat too, you know. So I will see you all there to watch the second installment of the Memories anthology series, and then have a little discussion afterwards. So thank you. Shadow. All right. Good night. Be safe. Allie, you're gonna do so great. You're doing